Welcome to FPB's Meet the Candidates. This Cable 10 series allows you, the viewer, the voter, to get a closer look at our candidates and how they feel about the issues that are important to us. This is all leading up to the general election, which is on Tuesday, November 6th. Today's guest is Derrick Graham, and he's the Democratic candidate for our State House of Representatives of the 57th District. Welcome.
Thank you. Well, glad to be here, Kathy.
Well, we appreciate you coming in.
Thank
and
you.
I want to start out by you telling us a little bit about yourself. I know you've been our representative for quite some time, but there may be people new to the community who don't know who you are. So I thought maybe you could just tell us who you are and why you're choosing to run again.
Well, you know, Kathy, I was born and reared here in Frankfort, in Franklin County, and my family was very engaged in the community. And I've always been engaged in the community, even when I was a youngster. First got involved with helping other candidates run for local and statewide office. I taught school, as you well know, for 27 years in the Frankfort Independent School District. Prior to that, I had worked for the state for about 3 years. I'm married to Mildred Tompkins Graham. We've been married. We celebrated our 30th wedding anniversary this year.
Congratulations.
We have 2 daughters, Taylor and Blake. I attended school in the Frankfort Independent School District. I went to Kentucky State University, where I received my bachelor's degree in American government and political science. I attended The Ohio State University, where I received my master's degree in public policy and American government. And for 9 years, I served on the City Commission from 1992 to 2000. And I'm currently serving in the House of Representatives, of which I was elected initially in 2002. So that is basically a summary of what I have done in the lifetime of living here in Frankfort and Franklin County. And I was born and reared here, as I said.
So why have you chosen another term? You want to run again?
Well, you know, I have always tried to serve and try to do the right thing. And 2 things that are very important to me. Number 1 is public education, and number 2 is making sure that our public employees are served and represented in a way in which you can be a voice for them. Number 3 is that I think that even though we passed a somewhat of what you would call a tax bill that was not fair, I think that we can come up with a better way, in a bipartisan way, of creating a tax reform in which both parties can work together, and it would be equitable and fair to everyone in the Commonwealth. And I'm really focused on making sure that our public employees are treated fairly, and that a promise kept, a promise made is a promise kept. And I don't think we've done that in the last few years, and I have always been a fighter for those main 2 things, public education and for our public employees. And speaking of public education, when the country, and I'm going to use my little history teacher background.
Oh, goodness.
When the country was first founded, and of course the original 13 states were on the East Coast, and as the country looked toward expanding to the west, past the Appalachian Mountains, one of the key things in that expansion was the development of public education. And what the founding fathers of this country wanted was an education system that would allow every opportunity for anyone and everyone to succeed. And so it became this tradition, and this focus on education was the key to success. And when you have an educated citizenry, you have a stronger democracy. And that's what they understood, and that's what they knew. And they did not want it to be based upon what had happened in Europe when we served as a colony to England. They wanted education to be the opportunity, the key to open the door to success for anybody who wished to succeed. And that's what this country has been founded on. Every parent wanted their child to do better than what they did. And that's been the tradition since the beginning of this country. And I think public education is the way in which everyone can achieve to the level that they wish to achieve if they have the desire and the determination to do so. And so that's why I'm still in this, because I have a passion for public education. I have a passion to make sure that our public employees are given the opportunities and the rights that they have earned to make sure that they get their fair share, particularly with their retirement.
Okay. Well, as an incumbent, you have the advantage of having experience and a record. So share with us some of the achievements you have initiated during your terms.
Well, I've always been an advocate for open meetings, open records, and I have sponsored legislation that has been successful in making sure that the press has access to all information that they are guaranteed and that we should provide to them. My record in terms of public education, I have passed bills that deal with early childhood education. And so having done all those things and having to also, I supported what we called the expungement bill of 2016. I was a co-sponsor of that, which allows some people who have committed nonviolent crimes to regain their citizenry back and their voting rights back. And finally, this past session, I was one of the major co-sponsors in the adoption program that would allow people to adopt and to cut the red tape in their adoption process. I served on the panel that studied it, and then I served as a major co-sponsor of that particular bill.
Excellent. So would you agree that there is a toxic political atmosphere, not only at our national level, but also here in our state house?
I definitely will agree to that, and to be quite honest, it has played out on both sides. But what the public really wants, they want for us to sit down together, and that's what has not happened, particularly in the last 2 years of this session. If you look at the pension bill, the revenue bills, those bills were rolled out. They were not really vetted. It was done by the majority party, which controls both the House and the Senate. And as a result, there's a lot of flaws in those bills because we didn't vet it with those who were impacted. And there was no discussion among the different parties to try to work out a bill that was comparable and was fair to everyone involved. And I think people are tired of that. They want solutions. They don't want to have this standoff all the time. They're tired of the fighting. They're tired of the arguing. They want us to work collaboratively in trying to solve the problems, not only of this Commonwealth, but of this nation as well.
So how can we get there? How can this, it just seems to be...
Well, the whole reason why we have succeeded is that you got to compromise. And if you look at major legislation over the years, whether it's on the federal level or state level, and I use CARA, which was the Kentucky Education Reform Act in the 1990s. Major changes took place there. But the one good thing about that was that it was done in a bipartisan fashion with Republicans and Democrats working together and working with the executive branch of government to craft legislation that really became the most innovative reform act across the country. People were coming to Kentucky to look at the CARA law that was passed because it was really groundbreaking in terms of how it was changing education. And we were on that course.
Yeah.
But I'm afraid, and when we took politics out of the education, because you probably don't remember this, but the superintendent of public instructions was elected.
Oh yeah, I remember.
Which made it more political than it was in terms of service to our education, educating our students. And so we took politics out of it, where a commissioner was chosen by the Board of Education. Now, the Board of Education is appointed by the governor, but they are also Republicans and Democrats. And so what has happened is that here in the last 2 years, the Department of Education has been more politicized with and we had an excellent commissioner in Stephen Pruitt, but the board got rid of him and brought in a new acting commissioner. And I'm not being critical of the acting commissioner. I'm being critical of the process of politicizing our education department. And I think that's not good for us in terms of moving forward. Okay. And I look at, and let me just go into that if I can. Sure. In 2017, we passed the charter school bill. And what many people don't understand is that in that bill, it takes really local control away from the Board of Education, because in that bill it says if a charter company comes to, say, Franklin County Public Schools or the Frankfort Independent School Districts and says, we want to create a charter school, and the two districts says, no, we don't need a charter school, the law says that they can then appeal to the State Board of Education, and they can overturn the decision of the local school boards. Now, this local school board is supposed to be the governing board for that particular school district and for the community. It's supposed to be local control, but it's taking it out of their hands to create this charter schools. Now, this also happens if they are granted a charter and they create a charter school, and say in 3 years they decide that they don't want to continue the charter schools, then all that goes back to the city or the county public schools, and they left with the debt indebtedness of that particular school.
Right.
The other thing is that transportation has to be provided. So you're having to take school buses. Say if a child lives in South Frankfort, for example, and he's able to walk to school, particularly to 2nd Street or Frankfort High.
Yeah.
But if that charter school is located further away, then the district has to provide the transportation to get that child to the school.
Yeah.
So it's really a sad moment, and I hope that even though money wasn't funding the charter schools, it still is on the books for people to come in and create these charter schools.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm concerned about, is the politicalization of our education system.
Well, while we're talking about education, a Kentucky teacher is the face of a Time magazine story on underpaid educators. The story focuses on the recent teacher uprising in America and here in Kentucky. Do you think teachers are underpaid?
Oh, I know they are.
Yeah.
And I speak from experience. It is not, and my daughter, believe it or not, is a teacher now. So she is a third generation in this classroom and a fourth generation of being a teacher. It is not unusual for teachers to go to work 2 and 3 hours before classes start. And it's not unusual for them to stay 2 and 3, 4 hours after school closes. It's not unusual for a teacher to be in the classroom on a Saturday or a Sunday afternoon, or a Saturday morning and a Sunday afternoon, preparing for the incoming week. It is not unusual for a teacher when they're on spring break to be working in the school while they're on spring break. It is not unusual for a teacher to use their own funds to have school supplies. And for those who work in lower income districts, helping their students with clothing, with food, or just being there for students when they need them. Teachers go way and beyond. And then if you look at the education process, most teachers aspire to get their master's degree. Once they complete their bachelor's, they go for their master's, they go for rank 1 degrees, they go for a PhD. They're paying for that, and they are particularly those who have gone through just their bachelor's degree. They're about $25,000, $30,000 in debt when they get out of school, if they've had to take money, loans to get through school. So if you think that they're overpaid, then you need to work in their shoes for a day, and you'll see that teachers are underpaid. But you know what? Even though they're underpaid, they are committed and dedicated to those children. And they go beyond what most people, and if you look in most professions, if you work out beyond those hours that you are designated to work, you're compensated for that. Teachers do not get compensated for that. So the answer to that question is yes.
Well, what can the General Assembly do to address that? How can that be?
Well, that's where it comes in with tax modernization and trying to come up with a fair and equitable tax system that can generate new revenues, that doesn't put the burdens on working and middle class families, but it helps. I think people are committed toward public education. And I think people are committed, and some of this is also local. The local communities have to also take the steps in terms of increasing the revenue on the local level. And our school districts, I just recall reading, have taken that approach. But that's where we need to look at ways in which to generate new revenue. And one of those ways, which people don't like to talk about, but I do think that we need to study, is this betting on these what the courts now have said we can do on these games that are in progress, that are, it really is, and I'm not involved in that, but I have friends who are, and it really has taken off.
Yeah.
And we probably, and it's not probably, we do need to look at ways in which we can generate revenue.
Okay. Well, you're hitting all my points here.
Okay. All right. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. That's great. Back on education real quick, back to our teachers. Last spring in Kentucky, teachers forced school closures and the statewide sick out, followed by the passage of the controversial pension bill. And
151.
Yeah.
Is what it was.
They demanded lawmakers' attention with protests and rallies in the Capitol. Do you think that kind of thing is a good idea? Do you agree with Governor Bevin's response?
Do I agree with the teachers coming?
The way they did that, and
oh, I think it was democracy at its best.
Okay.
And as a social studies teacher, and you know this,
Yeah.
you know, I always said to my students, get engaged, get involved, and run for political office.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I have a former student who's running against me, but that's okay.
Good teacher.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So I think that what they did was, I mean, this started across the country. It started in West Virginia, and it just spread from West Virginia to Kentucky to Oklahoma. What it did, it teachers are so engaged in teaching that they really block out everything. I mean, I was talking to my daughter one time, and she said, "Dad, we are so engaged." She said, "I've been around politics and you running, and I'm a little bit aware of current events and that sort of thing." And she said, "Teachers are aware to an extent of current events, but they're so engaged in preparing for school that they block out everything." And if you've been in education, you understand what she's saying, because I understand that. You're so focused on doing your job and trying to educate your kids that you block out everything.
Yeah.
But what this did was, it was an awakening for teachers that they've got to be engaged, they've got to be involved, and they need to know who is representing them and who's not representing them, who's their legislator, and who's their state senator, who's their state representative, and what the position of the governor. And in regards to the governor, I think his actions and his comments, and I think he came back and had to apologize to teachers, but I think that as the chief executive officer of this Commonwealth, he is responsible for representing all of us, and therefore he should not, as the leader of this Commonwealth, make those kind of disparaging remarks, particularly to a group of people. And a lot of teachers, most teachers are women. And to make those comments, it was unfair and it was unjust. And I'm glad that he realized that he needed to come back, and to an extent he apologized for that.
Yeah. Well, you talked a bit about the tax reforms and what's needed. Earlier this year, the General Assembly passed tax reform bills, and everyone is asking the same question: are my taxes going to go up? Are they going to go down? How are those changes that were made affecting average Kentuckians, and who's benefiting the most?
Well, I think at the very top, they benefited with a tax cut. And those in the working middle class, if you look at some of the things that place tax on them, services, that's going to hurt working middle class families more, such as lawn care, such as carrying your dog to the vet. And the question becomes, how are we going to be able to guarantee that those services are going to pay their taxes on that? But one thing that I want to, particularly that impacts here in Franklin County, the area of the retirees. You know, under the old system, the level of taxation until you pass 40, I believe it was $40,118, in which you were not taxed on in terms of your retirement. Anything above that, you would be taxed. But they lowered that to, I believe, $30,118. And so that is that's what I'm saying. It's not a fair and equitable system.
Yeah.
And so that's why I hope, and let me also say this, that bill, like the other bills, were passed, actually, they were passed in which the majority party basically formulated it and introduced it without any input from the minority party, which was our party. And a major change like that needs bipartisan support. And you need to vet it with the constituencies that are impacted. And neither of those things were done.
Okay. Well, as a result of what counties and cities are being asked to contribute more to the pension fund, our Franklin Circuit Court, our Frankfort City Commission, and both school districts have had to increase their tax rates. We talked about what are revenues, generating revenue. What are some other ways we can generate revenue that would decrease or minimize at least future tax increases?
Well, I think I just talked about sports betting.
We talked about the sports betting, so that you support that.
Yes, I do.
Do you support the legalization of marijuana to be regulated and taxed?
Well, what I do think is that we need to seriously look at it, and not close our eyes on the possibility of doing it. And I think there is a strong push. I just came back from a Kentucky League of Cities, and I was talking to a city councilman from a small town. And he said, we possibly will miss out on this sports betting as well as this marijuana, just as we missed out on the gaming issue when our neighbor states begin to create these the gaming programs that they have in Indiana and Ohio. And so we've got to look forward in terms of trying to find new ways in which we can generate revenue. And I'm for that, as long as it's fair and it's equitable.
Yeah.
And I'm willing to look at everything, put everything there, but it's got to be fair and equitable to all. And let's go back to this, Kathy. The one thing that happened with CARA, talk about CARA and education reform, it was the business community that came and said, we've got to do something in terms of improving our education system. And it was the business community that said to our elected officials, we are willing to help pay for that, because education is the key for us to bring new companies in. Because if you got great schools, corporations would be willing to come in. And the first thing that parents are going to want to know is, how's the school systems here? And so they understood that in the 1990s, and they encouraged the General Assembly to look at reforming the tax structures in Kentucky, and they did. And so that was the way in which we were able to implement CARA, was because the business community got engaged and involved at the very beginning.
Okay. Well, another thing right now that we're hearing from the business community is that they have a hard time finding workers because...
the soft skills?
Well, no, because when they find workers, they can't pass a drug test. We have an opioid epidemic right now that everyone's talking about. Is there anything the General Assembly can do to address that problem that we're having? It's not only statewide, but it's a nationwide issue.
I think what the problem is that we've got companies who are producing this medicine they know they're making money off of it. And we've got to regulate it, and we've got to clamp down on these medicines and these doctors and these pharmaceutical companies who are pushing this medicine, and to tax this medicine to where we can tax it out of people abusing it. But there are people that are needing this medicine because of the pain that they're in and because their doctors understand that. But there's a lot of abuse taking place, and we've got to figure out ways in which we can stop the flow of these opioids into our communities.
Okay. Well, just a couple more questions just about the General Assembly in general. Do you think the Kentucky legislature is adequately transparent?
No.
what steps need to be taken?
Well, I've always been a person, I tell you, transparent in the fact that when bills are initiated, we were not transparent in bringing in, as I said, those people who were impacted or would be impacted by these laws that were passed this past session. And I think that we are transparent in one sense. I think it's better than it was, but I think the one thing that I have a problem with when we talk about the General Assembly, and I use the budget is passed in the House. All money bills have to come out of the House first. And we've had subcommittees for different areas of the budget. And we would pass the budget as a whole and then send it to the Senate. And then the Senate would pass what we had initiated, or they would change some things. But when in the final negotiations, it is really the leadership of the House and the Senate that really crafts a budget, the final budget out to send to the governor. And to me, I think for those who are in leadership, whether it's the 5 majority in the Senate and the 5 majority in the House, I think it needs to be a much more open process where you have more than just those majority party leaders. And sometimes, because we had a Senate, a Republican Senate and a House, Democratic House, they were able to collaborate together. But what we're seeing when one party dominates the whole General Assembly, then transparency really is lost, because you only have those 10 people who are really working and crafting the budget, which was what happened this session. So that's why I say, no, we're not as transparent as we should be.
Okay. Well, I've enjoyed our conversation today, and now I'm going to let you take the opportunity to directly address our viewers and tell them why you're the best person for this seat and ask for their vote.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathy, and it's been a joy to be here.
It's fun.
Over the last 16 years, I've had the opportunity of serving the people of Frankfort and Franklin County in the Kentucky General Assembly in the House of Representatives. And once again, I come to you asking for your support. And I ask that you look at the record that I have basically laid in those 16 years of fighting for our public employees, fighting for public education, fighting for transparency in the General Assembly, and fighting for you, fighting for this community, and wanting to move this community forward. And so I ask that as you make the decision this November, that you look at the record that I have developed over those years representing you. And I think, and I hope, and I do believe that you will see that I have been a good public servant. I have worked hard, and I've been dedicated to the people of this community. I thank you for granting me the opportunity of service. And I thank you for the support that you have given me over the years. God bless you, and God keep you, and God bless this Commonwealth.
Thank you so much for coming by. I know our viewers appreciate hearing directly from our candidates, and it's just so important that I appreciate you participating.
Well, thank you all for inviting me, and it's been a while since I've been here, so I'm glad to be back.
Well, we're glad to have you. Folks, it's Derrick Graham. He is the Democratic candidate, the incumbent for our State House of Representatives in the 57th District. I want to remind our viewers that Election Day is November 6th. Go vote, and then when you're done voting, go home and tune in to Channel 10, where you can get live election coverage coming at you directly from the county clerk's office. It's election season, which means it's time to get informed, go vote, and we'll see you next time on Meet the Candidates.